Hey folks, welcome to episode 4 of Mind Wars Forum. Today we'll be talking with Crystal Good about poetry in the coal fields and a few other interesting topics. I want to remind everyone that if you want to continue supporting the Mind Wars Museum, continue supporting programming like this, that you need to click on the link below, become a museum member, and also go to our website, check out our online store where you can buy bandanas, hats, t-shirts, and a number of other items. So support our museum during this pandemic and help us to continue bringing this kind of programming to you. Without further ado, let's get to episode 4 of Mind Wars Forum. All right. Hey, Crystal, how are you?
I'm good. Hey, Chuck.
How are things going during the pandemic and all that?
Well, I think, my family has experienced some loss. My cousin, who's 5, was the first child to die in Detroit. And that was my first sort of, reality check about this pandemic, COVID-19. But and I don't want to segue with an other than that, but, that gave me a reality sort of anchor that this is real, because the lens that I have in Charleston, we're locked in our homes. I don't really see any, I've always worked from home, so I'm missing my Taylor books, my Moxie, but my life, I guess, the pattern of it as far as the workflow and things like that hasn't changed too much. So I've gotten a lot of personal benefit out of the pandemic. But how are you doing?
Okay. Well, first of all, sorry to hear about your cousin. I didn't know
Yeah.
about that. So that's terrible. Same thing, fighting off boredom at times, trying to stay busy by doing odd little shows for museums
Yeah.
and getting that done. And I thought you were the perfect person to talk to because this is kind of, in some way, the discussion we should have had in New York. And
Oh, yeah, that little thing. Yeah.
yeah, we were going to go up to talk and do a little panel on coal country. And
Yeah. And we were all so excited, and the offer came, and we all agreed, and we were getting together, and then slowly, day by day by day, it disappeared.
yeah, I was real disappointed that we
But
didn't.
what a great group of human beings to work with. I was so impressed with, their kindness, their thoughtfulness, their care, not only just for us as presenters, but also for the community. And it's just a loss for everyone. But hopefully, that we can get on stage and jam with Steve Earle sometime here soon.
Yeah, I hope so. I was a little skeptical at first, but it does seem like it was a really great project, and
Yeah.
it'll be interesting.
Well, we'll never know, will we?
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens there. So, some people may wonder why on earth I want to talk to a poet with the Mind Wars Museum, but I think that it's perfect to talk to you when people first walk in the museum, or the original space of the museum. The first thing that they see when the exhibits is a poem by Carl Sandburg called The Company Town. And it kind of, when we were trying to find ways to tell the story of the Mind Wars, looking at poetry and looking at songs and things like that, the art from the period seemed like a perfect way to kind of capture the moments in ways that I couldn't capture if I was going to write up a big 2-paragraph thing up on the wall that no one was going to read. Those poetry captures that in a lot of ways. So that's one of the reasons when I thought about poetry in Appalachian and the coal fields, I thought about you. We've known each other, about 7 years now?
Gosh, yeah.
Yeah. So
Pushing a decade. Yeah.
Yeah, we're pushing a decade. So what, for people who aren't familiar with your work and know you, of course, you were the author of the book Valley Girl, which is a really popular regional book on poetry. But tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and your background.
Sure thing. Well, my name is Crystal Good, and I like to start off with, I'm a sixth generation West Virginian, right? My granddaddy said I was West Virginia before West Virginia was West Virginia, and that's true. So, that just means my folks were here before West Virginia actually became West Virginia, and that's one side of the street. And I have and I'm from St. Albans, so I grew up in Kanawha County, which to some people, that makes me a bit of a city girl, in regards, that I was, Charleston was a part of my, coming of age stories. I don't know. And I mentioned my grandfather because he's such a part of my poetry becoming. I was graduated high school in the 90s, and that seemed to be, very commonplace that everyone, the plan was you're just going to go to college and get out of here, and, and it's also sort of the Randy Moss era. And I say that because, we've just finished up the Michael Jordan episodes during the pandemic.
Yeah,
Which,
Last Dance.
yeah, The Last Dance.
Yeah.
And, I got so happy because Michael Jordan wrote a poem, right? And of course, that was all the buzz on Twitter, like, what was Michael Jordan's poem? But Michael Jordan wrote a poem because poetry is the language of the heart. Poetry is how you can, summarize difficult things. And it's that intangible kind of teachable moment, and it's so cathartic. And so, the fact that Michael Jordan wrote a poem, and I'm like, of course he wrote a poem. Phil Jackson was his coach. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
There's all these different variables, but he did, and everybody can, right? And poetry is the language that we use in difficult times, in joyous times, right? So, starting this exhibit in the Mind Wars Museum with a poem, to me is perfect, but my journey as a poet and a West Virginian came from a challenge from my grandfather, just challenging me to learn my history. And he said, I really didn't know it, and that's, he knew me well, because I'm the kind of person, you tell me I can't do something, then that's, what propels me into doing it. So my grandfather was a good coach. And so I kind of went on this quest, to find out more about West Virginia. And it's endless, because it's like you just keep finding nuggets of yourself, literally, like your family or yourself or your connection, or I didn't know that. And then you find these amazing stories, and they haven't been told, or maybe they haven't been told in a place that's accessible, so I'm still on that journey, Chuck. And, I kind of entered into it with my writing with the stories of coal and of the present, which is sort of the near past in a way, with mountaintop removal, and then sort of how we got there. And now I am absorbed in salt history, right?
Oh, yeah.
So sort of the decade before coal, which we don't really talk about in America, the salt mines of Detroit, the salt mines of West Virginia, and how that's the foundation of our country, at least. Anyway, so for me, it's never ending, the journey of discovering who you are, and then I just try to translate that into a poem, as the poems come to me, and I've been fortunate that I've found an audience that has received my poems. I'm not doing anything different than a lot of people have done, across hundreds of years in the region through the poetry or song. We just kind of have different tools now with the internet and different ways of connecting that can send the story around, and I'm fortunate for that. But I'm also kind of in a new place, which is what when we were talking on what we were going to talk about, that I said I wanted to talk about celebration, because a lot of my poetry has dealt with sort of the hard facts and figures of protest, of destruction, of cancer, of, like the company versus, versus the community, all of that. And I think we have to hold some space for the good times, for the joyous times. And think this pandemic has opened me up to seeing how, we pride ourselves on being resilient, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is a wonderful characteristic and an opportunity. But if we're constantly claiming a resilient identity, we will always have an opportunity to prove it.
That's right.
So, in that, I'm curious about, what or how the museum, or what, how we celebrate, what happens after the protest. So anyway, that's my little question for you.
Yeah, well, okay. First of all, there's a lot to unpack there. I love it that you mentioned the salt industry, first of all. That's an underexplored area, even among those who explore our own history. The salt industry. Staley wrote a book about it a number of years ago that I think WVU Press has reprinted. It's a good book. It's not necessarily the best page turner in the world, but yeah, my family was a part of that too. My great and great grandfathers hauled salt on flatboats down the Canal River.
Wow. Keeney did that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Frank Keeney's father.
Okay. Was in salt. Yeah.
And his grandfather. Yeah. So they were in the salt until that began to decline, and then the industry came in. We all know how that turned out. So yeah, so I think it's really interesting that you're going back into the salt, and of course, some of the first coal that was mined in the Kanawha Valley was salt furnaces.
Yeah.
Slaves. They used slaves in those mines in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
So yes. So as far as celebrating, a couple of things. It reminds me of a quote of my great-grandfather who, in the 30s, when they were in the midst of the Great Depression, we may be headed towards another one, who knows, hopefully not. But in the midst of Great Depression, when he started his own union and he was giving one of his speeches, he said, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember the exact quote, but he says, we've got to learn things. We've got to sing songs. We've got to have fun. Or else what do you have to say whenever you look back on life? So yeah, even in the midst of all these awful situations, you have to find that level of joy. And I think we've done some of that at the Mine Wars Museum. It's very easy to go down the slippery slope of West Virginia history as doom and gloom.
Yeah.
It's very easy to do that. And it's also, it seems like often the parallel narrative to the doom and gloom is I guess the romanticized mountaineer is sometimes that. But we have to try to find the reality in family, in home, in place, in identity. Soledad O'Brien told me after she interviewed me that West Virginia was the one place other than New Orleans where people in America had the most sense of place that she had been. Yeah.
And that yes. And I understand that because you have to leave this place, I think, in order to understand that. You know what I mean? Like, you have to have some different perspective, and that's why I think Soledad and people like that. But even just the conversation about place, we could go on and on, because, for me, part of it being categorized and self-categorized as an Affralachian poet, that, there's two places that I'm always talking about, or possibly multiple places when I'm talking about my regional identity. And that's, the physical land and what it talks to me. And if, the spirit that I feel, when I'm at the New River Gorge, when I'm in, I always like to throw this in, in a forest, because it's, the second biodiverse, a forest next to the Amazon, like, this is my home, or then the people, you know what I mean? The resilience of the people, or the stories of the people, or the language of the people. So, I feel fortunate to have been born West by God.
Yeah. And you came back. I was having this conversation with Roger May in our last episode, because he left for a long time. And he referred to it as, he kind of said that he never really felt like he left. He kind of felt like he was on deployment somewhere.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I always kept a foot in West Virginia, and now, time is moving so quickly that, my coming back to West Virginia is so long ago. But I was fortunate to travel as a young woman. I was a model, professional model, and I worked in New York and was in Atlanta, and I worked for Ralph Lauren and Calvin Klein. I was with Elite. I was very fortunate. I didn't really understand that, but I will tell you one of the things that I learned in that industry was it wasn't necessary. You needed to meet a certain criteria in order to be a model, whatever that was in terms of looks or height or weight or things like that. But people would tell me that the reason that they continued to work with me was because I was nice and because I hung my clothes up, right? Or I took care of my things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was odd because my mother would have had a fit if she knew I just dropped my clothes on the floor. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I remember just doing fashion shows and people would say, no, we'll do that for you. Right. And it was odd to me. Like, I'm here to help, I'm here to help the other girls. Let me help you get, just this sort of, in that I didn't think twice about it. I didn't think twice about showing up on time or being prepared or, helping somebody else or doing things that I wasn't expected to do. And I think that comes from a regional hard work, identity. I do remember getting made fun of a little bit, but, some of the words I would say or
Right.
not knowing certain things just so that, being naive and young. But, the coming back was really for safety. I mean, there's just as a young woman, when your family is here and you've experienced the big city and the big world out there, coming home to your safe little valley where everybody knows everybody, the mountains can feel like a hug,
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they feel like they're strangling me now, but it ebbs and flows, but it can feel very safe, very, very womb-like to be here.
But you're right. I love the hug
Yeah.
aspect of it, and choking. It's both.
Yeah.
Depending on what day of the week, maybe.
Yeah.
But when people think about living in the mountains too, you're often not on a mountain. You're always
Right.
down below, in between mountains, to where it's almost there's this closed in kind of idea to it. But you mentioned the valley, and of course your book Valley Girl. Now it's going to be released on audio. Is that
Yeah, I'm working on, I'm almost finished. It's really, I kind of think of that little book as a bit of a, an Appalachian cult classic. I never worked with a press. I just printed it back in the day. The first run was at Kinko's, which nobody even knows what that is when I say Kinko's.
Yeah, I do. Sorry.
Yeah. And so I'm trying to think of, I'm going to re-release it on audio, and I'm also going to re-release it or reprint it as a very small run. I'm working with Kinship, not Kinship, beside Kinship. What's the printer beside Kinship?
I can't think of their name, but I know who they are. I know exactly what you're talking about.
I can't believe I can't remember. Here's my moment. But anyway, I'm working to on a print, of the book, a very special hand printed copy. I have a bit of a thing for paper, and so I'm planning to do a small run for that, and sort of take it out of circulation. It's been archived in most of the universities that have an Appalachian Studies program, and just kind of take it off Amazon. God bless America. I'm selling my book on Amazon, but that's what you got to do.
Yeah.
It's been such a privilege, that book. I just can't even, I wouldn't have even fathomed that literally a little book that I printed off at Kinko's, has allowed me opportunities to really travel around the world.
Yeah. It was, That was my first introduction to your poetry, and it wasn't at first the book. It was I saw you
Mm-hmm.
online on
Mm-hmm.
YouTube, and you did a reading of Boom Boom.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, that's maybe the poem that you're most famous for, and that it came at a really unique time for me because I had only been back to
Mm-hmm.
southern West Virginia for a couple of years. I've lived in
Yeah.
Morgantown for
Yeah.
7 years, and I hadn't been to the coal fields since I'd been in high school. And so
Oh.
I was like close to 15 years away from the coal fields and I hadn't been there since then. And when I came back, of course, there was no Friends of Coal when I left. I come
Mm-hmm.
back and there's bumper stickers everywhere.
Right.
There's all this atmosphere. And I listened to your poem and I was like, there's somebody who gets it.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly in regards to mountaintop removal, in regards to attitudes and it really connected with me because seeing the coal fields after being away from them and then coming back and seeing how drastically they changed really quickly, I think in that 15-year period or so, particularly with mountaintop removal and the
Yeah.
heightened tensions around that and the declining industry. And I just thought it captured this struggle and what people are sacrificing of themselves in order to feed themselves and all of that. And so that's when I began to think of your work as, in a sense, a type of the historic record, something
Yeah.
that, a scholar 50 years from now may look back when they're looking back at these decades to see something that captured that moment. And so, do you consider yourself more of a performance artist than a writer? Because watching you do your poems and reading your poems is very different.
Yeah. It's two different experiences. Yeah. I got an MFA because I felt insecure about being a poet. I thought I needed to be a better writer on the page. And then about halfway through my MFA degree, I was like, this is ridiculous, Crystal, right? Like,
Mhm.
there is a difference between a page poet and a performance poet. I used to feel really, insecure about people would say, oh, I like it better when you read it, right? Like I can hear the cadence better. And that made me think, oh, people can't read my work on a page. But now, I'm comfortable in both spaces,
Mhm.
whether I'm writing on the page or writing for the page or I'm writing for performance. But, the performance is where the exchange happens. When you read my poem in your home or you put a book on a shelf or it passes through your online, I don't get to share that exchange with you, so the performance art, the live moment with the audience there, that can either react in a moment that I anticipate they will or not. For me, that's where the energy is, and that's what I love. And I've started to transition my work more, I think you can see my social media senator
Uh-huh.
right back here.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So the areas that I'm trying to play in a little bit more, and I use play, professionally because there needs to be that level of enjoyment, because I'm tackling difficult subjects, mountaintop removal, you talk about boom, boom, mountaintop removal, the abuse of women, land, I'm tackling these topics that are very heavy, and I personally have to find a way to enter them. So, the work that is coming from me now is very playful, and it got a comedic tone to it, and I think that's because it's so dense. It's really the only way that I personally can kind of enter into it, but it also requires someone to consume it on the other end in real time, whether I'm doing something on Twitter,
Mhm.
which is a platform that I use quite often for expression and for performance art. And I don't know if people ever really get it or they don't, or some people do, or some people don't, to me, it's no different than reading poems at the Empty Glass. So, or any other venue that I've been in. So yeah, I do think of my work, in terms of of a historical reference, especially with Valley Girl and a lot of the work that I've put out. Then I also feel a responsibility in it. Once you start getting in the canon, so to speak, it's like, oh shit, right? Like,
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you the dissertations or the footnotes or the scholars, you know what I mean? The people that have reached out to me to put my work, and I never anticipated that.
Mhm.
Never. It's quite an honor now, to think that you can take a difficult subject and condense it into something that people emotionally and intellectually can connect with. So.
You referenced the mind wars in some of your poetry.
Yeah, it gives me the history of the mind wars. It fires me up, because it's unknown. It was hidden history, and I think that's the lesson to be learned, especially nowadays when technology is so important and things can so easily can be rewritten, right? And or deleted, or they always say, it's the victor always writes the history,
Mhm.
so I think we have to train ourselves, like you mentioned, to look for the poets, look for the everyday artifacts, look for the details of the living, right, of the human living, when you start to look for your history or the story of who came before you.
Right. So it's so much a part of what we do at the museum is we want to be a part of not just something that tells the history. We want to kind of be a ground zero for art, literature, those kinds of things in the coal fields. And so we really hope to bring you down once this whole thing is over and we can have events again. I'm looking forward to in our new space coming down because it's so much more space than our original area. You were in the original spot and you know how
Yeah,
cramped it is. Having
yeah,
an event there is awful, particularly with an air conditioning that only works some of the time.
yeah.
But we've got a huge space now and we can have bigger events. So we're looking forward to having you come down at some point in the future and doing some of that performance poetry. And it is such the interaction that you get. I've seen you perform your poetry live, and it has this kind of mesmerizing way of drawing you into the history. They're going to listen to your poems about the history much more than they're going to listen to my lectures about the history every day of the week. So I think that's important, that you can communicate in that kind of way.
Well, I love to come down. I love, that little town is just, it's an energy vessel. You know what I mean? There's so much there just walking down the street. And there's so much opportunity. I remember the last time I was there, I was working on a project with a bunch of folklorists, and boy, let me tell you, Matewan is fun to hang out in with a bunch of folklorists, right? And I love that you can come to the town, and the museum is an anchor, and you can hold a conference there. You can have a family reunion. You can just do your own writer's retreat. You can do your own day escape. I mean, of course, once the world opens up, and it will be soon, and really lose yourself in the past, present, and future, because when I'm there, as much as I am absorbing the past, I am visioning the future.
Yeah, it is. It's almost a place for renewal in some ways, whether
Yeah.
we're talking about cultural renewal, economic renewal, political renewal, a lot of different ways in which we can try to use this little area out
Mm-hmm.
of the way as a little stepping stone,
Yep.
maybe to try to change it. And we need lots of stepping stones, as you well know, where we live. So what I want to do is I want to close this video out. We're at about the half-hour mark right
Okay.
now. And so I want to close it out with one of your poems, and we're going to edit that in.
Okay.
at the end, so it'll close with your poem. And the title, what is the title of the poem that we're going to be seeing?
Well, let me see. It's civil. It's gone through several alliterations, but I think it's civil up and rising.
Civil Up and Rising. Yes.
Hmm.
And it references Blair Mountain, but it also references a lot of the racial turmoil that was going on recently in a number of places.
Yeah, I'll quickly tell you the genesis of this poem.
Yeah.
So I am a really bad homeschool mom. Okay, so when when my middle child was when I was homeschooling my middle child Ty, I gave her an assignment because this is when the Baltimore uprisings were happening, right?
Mhm.
So in my mind, I'm teaching because I'm your teacher, right? So we're gonna learn a little bit about mind wars, but Baltimore's happening, so that's a current event. So I just said, hey, kind of like how you use a grad student.
Yeah. Yeah.
I challenged her, to compare and contrast these two events that were happening. And I'm so impressed. It's one of the beautiful things about when you homeschool a child, which every parent now is getting a little taste of.
Hmm.
Just your children's genius and where their strengths and their vision. And so she kind of helped me birth this poem unknowingly, right? Because that the two things were parallel, meaning these were civil uprisings that were labeled as riots, that were both very much demonized. And then the red bandanas, because there's so many photographs of anyway, you all will get into the poem, but I just want to, the genesis of the poem was from a young mind that was able to see and compare and contrast these two events. But she could only do that because, the question was before her, and to me, it's very powerful that in each of these major events of where citizens are protesting or standing up for what they believe in, there's almost an erasure of what happened before that would give them a stronger blueprint, on how to execute. And so I believe, when I was working on the poem, I did reach out to people in Baltimore that were organized and asked them if they had ever heard of Blair Mountain, and they had never heard of it. Um, so anyway, that's sort of the genesis of the poem. I'm happy that it's out in the world now. If that tells you how long sometimes it takes my poems to become, we're talking about Baltimore, which was a good minute ago that America
Yeah.
was
Yeah. It
in
was.
that conflict. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and I love the connection between the present and the past. That's one of the things I try to do in class whenever someone's listening to me in the classroom, is try to make those types of comparisons. So I greatly appreciate your poetry, and I appreciate you keeping the history and the heritage alive in the poetry, which is one of the things that we try to do at the museum. And I think that it's one of you're one of our Appalachian banner carriers, as far as our heritage and our culture and all of that. So I'm thrilled that
Well,
you joined me.
I'm happy to be here. Your papa is probably just really proud of you.
I hope so. I hope so. It'd be interesting to know what he would think if he were around. The rest of
Yeah,
the family is very happy about it.
yeah.
So anyway, thanks for joining. For those watching, you can click on a link below at some point and go to our museum store and buy merchandise or become a
That's right.
member. Follow Crystal on Twitter. Yes, look at our nice bandanas that we got there. And so thanks for joining us. And as we close out, enjoy this poem by Crystal Good. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye. My name's Crystal Good. I'm recording this on June 4th, 2020 in Studio 111 in Charleston, West Virginia. This is a poem I wrote a while back during the uprisings in Baltimore. I believe it's 2015. 2019. The title of the poem is Civil Up and Rising, Baltimore on the 1, Blair Mountain on the 2, and here we are in 2020, and history seems to be repeating herself. This poem is also written a little tongue-in-cheek under the notion that black folks dance on the 1 and white folks on the 2 beat. So I begin. Which side are you on now? Which side are you on? Come on, all good people. News to you I'll tell. Can I count it all? Baltimore on the 1, 6 nights. Blair Mountain on the 2, 5 days. Which side are you on now? Which side are you on? Say it loud. 1921, the miners marched and protested. They had all the intimidation they could endure. Blood and brutality, blood and brutality. Them Phelps thugs bloodying miners' heads. And then them miners took to fight. Them miners took to shooting. Them miners took to fuck the police. But you ain't never heard of this? Oh, what? You ain't never heard of this? Which side are you on now? Say it loud. The largest armed rebellion march since the American Civil War. But you ain't never heard of this? You ain't never heard of this? Which side are you on? Say it proud. Baltimore up and rising. Red bandanas around their neck on the 1. Red bandanas red around their neck on the 2. Miners and ordinary citizens versus the Baldwin Phelps police in scabs. On the 1 week of rage, 100 people died, 1,000 arrested, 10,000 miners, 1 million shots fired. But you ain't never heard of this? Say it loud. On the 1, 6 nights till every battle's won. On the 2, 5 days till every battle's through. They say in Baltimore County there are no neutrals there. 6 nights on the 1, they say in Logan County there's too much misery and despair. 5 days on the 2.
George Floyd, Breonna Taylor.
They
Tamir
say they
Rice,
have to guard us to
Philando
educate their
Castile,
child. Their children
Sandra
live in
Bland,
luxury, our children almost wild.
Tory
Freddie
Robinson,
Gray, Sid
Gloria
Hatfield,
Steinem,
they say they have to guard us to educate their child. Their children live in
Peter
luxury,
Gaines,
our children almost wild.
Jamar Clark,
Gentlemen, can you stand it? Oh, tell
Brandon
me how
Brown,
you can.
David Joseph.
Will they call you a thug and
Lee
say you're
Marshall,
not a man?
Eric
On the
Reason,
1.
Tasha
Will you be a
McCain,
gun thug or will you be a man? On the
George
2.
Floyd,
Stand down,
George
stand
Floyd,
down on the 1, bombs and
George
martial
Floyd.
law. On the 2, but you ain't never heard of this. You ain't never heard of this. On the 1, thousands arrested. On the 2, coal companies prosecute. On the 1, thousands march. On the 2, us poor folks haven't got a chance. On the 1, unless we organize. On the 2, which side are you on? 1921, 2005 and teens. Say it loud. Baltimore on the 1.
Minneapolis,
Say it proud.
Minneapolis,
Blair Mountain on the 2. Which side are you?